On this Tuesday night, the abhorrent treatment of an Indigenous woman just before she died. Vile comments from hospital staff caught on video. The demands for accountability.
This is the norm. That's the problem.
Presidential debate night in America. What to expect from the first face-off between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Why do the majority of Canadians who have COVID-19 not know where they got it?
We don't know what's actually safe or not.
Plus, the new device that claims to detect if the virus is circulating in the air around you.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. We begin tonight with a disturbing story about the treatment of a woman in a Quebec hospital. She recorded video of staff making racist and callous remarks about her while she lay in bed pleading for help. A short time later, she died. Joyce Echaquan, an Indigenous woman, started recording on Facebook Live as she listened to staff insult her, call her stupid, and question her life choices. Tonight, outside the hospital in Joliet, where she died, there is outrage. People have gathered to demand an explanation and to honor her memory. And the call for answers has reached the highest levels.
What happened is totally unacceptable. There will be an inquiry, 2 inquiries, in fact, and the nurses did something unacceptable, and she's been fired.
There are lots of questions, including whether she was denied medical treatment and whether this is part of a pattern of behavior at that hospital. We're going to play portions of the video. Had Echaquan not recorded it just before she died, her story likely would have gone unnoticed. Felicia Perillo has our top story tonight.
Tied to a hospital bed in the moments before she passed away, Joyce Echaquan pleaded for help. Instead, she received shocking and racist remarks from hospital staff.
Qu'est-ce qu'ils penseraient tes enfants de te voir comme ça? Pense à eux autres un peu. Pour ça, je suis le meilleur pour fourrer que d'autres choses.
37-year-old Echaquan was brought to a hospital in Joliet, Quebec on Saturday by ambulance. On Monday, while in crisis, she started recording live on Facebook. There are reports that she suffered from heart issues and had a reaction to morphine she was given. The mother of 7 died soon after. Quebec's coroner's office announced it will investigate the circumstances surrounding her death. Members of the Atikamekw community that Echaquan was part of gathered to mourn. A community band council member said there needs to be justice for Joyce. Reaction to the incident was swift. During a press conference on Tuesday, Quebec Premier François Legault denounced the incident, saying a nurse has been fired and 2 different investigations are underway. But when asked if this was an example of systemic racism in Quebec, he denied that existed.
I really don't think that we have this kind of way of dealing with First Nation people in our hospitals in Quebec.
But some beg to differ. The executive director of the Native Women's Shelter in Montreal says discrimination against Indigenous peoples in the province is present and needs to be addressed quickly.
This is the norm. That's the problem. And it's only when it's recorded that everyone gets to see it. But it's, you know, if you're not lucky enough to have a cell phone to record it, then, you know, does it happen?
Multiple vigils and demonstrations are planned in honor of Echaquan, including a protest in Montreal on Saturday. Felicia Perillo, Global News, Joliet, Quebec.
Nova Scotia's premier has apologized to victims of systemic racism in that province and unveiled what is called a restorative plan to reform policing and public safety. Stephen McNeil said a brave and bold approach is necessary to combat the inequality Black, Indigenous, and other people of color have experienced in the justice system.
The current system is broken, and the only way to fix it is to find a better way, a more just way. Imagine that Black mother not needing to warn her children when they go outside. instead encouraging them to have fun and be who they are. Let's not imagine it anymore.
McNeil is establishing an independent team made up of members of the African, Nova Scotian and Mi'kmaq communities, plus police agencies, experts and government officials. It will assess what reforms are needed and recommend government action. Consultations will take place over the next 12 to 18 months, which is longer than McNeil may be in office. He announced his resignation last month, saying he would stay on as premier until the Nova Scotia Liberal Party picks a new leader. Now to COVID-19 and new efforts to try to clear the backlog of tests and reduce the lineups. The federal government says it has struck a deal to buy nearly 8 million rapid tests for use in Canada. The test is called ID Now. It's made by Abbott Industries in the United States. It claims to process results on the spot in less than 15 minutes. Right now, many Canadians have to wait days for COVID-19 test results. There's a problem, though. This new rapid test has not been approved by Health Canada. And as Mike Le Couteur explains, it's unclear when it will be.
The federal government wants to be able to test up to 200,000 Canadians per day for COVID-19. Backlogs across the country mean on average, we've only been able to test 71,000 people daily over the last week. So you're waiting hours to get tested and waiting up to 7 days for results.
A powerful point-of-care molecular instrument that is ideally suited for use on the front lines.
Enter the Abbott ID Now. The American-made test can turn around a result in 15 minutes and is being widely used throughout the United States. Our government announced it has secured up to 7.9 million tests.
We have pursued an advanced purchase agreement to secure Canada's access to these tests, conditional on Health Canada regulatory approval.
That lack of approval means they won't help ease the long lines across the country just yet. And Canada's top doctor says the tests may be most effective in remote areas.
To areas where you can't sort of send your samples without a really long turnaround time and you have to fly your samples, for example.
Dr. Teresa Tam did add those tests could help in high exposure areas where you need a quick turnaround on results. But there have also been issues with the ID Now test. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration has received dozens of reports of false negatives. The high-risk B-Cube has been approved by our health agency, but there is no purchase agreement. It's why the Conservatives say the Liberals have dropped the ball.
We're in a race to get these technologies. There are many other countries around the world that are trying to procure them, that are trying to manufacture them, that are trying to develop them.
The health minister contends the government is working flat out on this file.
We have also accelerated our processes at Health Canada to make sure that as new technology arrives, we are well placed to approve it. We have doubled our regulatory capacity.
Despite that, since March, Health Canada has only approved 3 point-of-care testing devices, one of which is for research purposes only. Donna?
Okay, Mike Le Couteur in Ottawa, thank you. The federal COVID alert app now has another province on board. Quebec, which had rejected the technology, now says it is ready to sign on, and the app will be live in Quebec in the coming days. Provinces have been slow to adopt the app since it first rolled out in Ontario in late July. BC, Alberta, PEI, Nova Scotia, and the Territories still have not signed on. Manitoba said yesterday it's ready to join and that the app will be active there in the next week. There are now so many new COVID-19 cases being reported every day in Canada. We've reached the peak we saw in April. Here's the picture across the country. Quebec is reporting almost 800 new cases today, the most of any province. In Ontario, there are 554 new cases, a dip from yesterday's record of 700. Out west, Alberta has 160 new cases today, and BC, 105.
The fact that cases are now at the same level as during the initial peak is worrisome. Things have escalated quickly, and they can escalate further unless we all work together to slow the spread of the virus.
We have heard that message on repeat, that we must limit the number of people we come into contact with. In fact, the majority of Canadians who have COVID-19 now don't know where they got it. That makes limiting its spread more difficult. Abigail Bimman looks at what we do know and why more information is vital for contact tracing.
In Ottawa, a new tool shows you where COVID-19 cases are by neighborhood.
By
being able to observe these differences at a neighborhood level and see which neighborhoods are most affected by the pandemic, we can really sort of focus our resources.
But it can't tell you where people caught the virus. And nationally, the latest public health data shows 58% of cases came from an unknown source.
That is telling us that perhaps there's more community transmission and hidden chains of transmission. You don't want that.
Ottawa says they've given billions to the provinces to improve data systems, even lent Ontario 1,500 federal contact tracers.
To get that number down.
But we don't know whether it's safer to go to the gym than a restaurant, to a private backyard gathering, or have a drink on a patio.
People would like to know exactly which activities or behavior I should avoid based on what is the most problematic. There's not such a fine line.
We don't know what's actually safe or not.
Experts say we may never know, in part because people have so many more contacts now than in the spring.
I want to see schools open, and I want to see other businesses which we need stay open, and I want to see businesses which have been shut for 3 or 4 months stay open. We can start by targeting things which won't have huge economic ramifications, and that would be social gatherings.
The most important thing to know is that you get COVID-19 from people, not from places.
In Quebec, as some areas face a new lockdown, many places are closing. Libraries and movie theaters, for example, while malls and gyms stay open.
They're trying to understand exactly why the government is closing down some businesses and keeping others open. But we are honestly unable to answer. There's a systematic lack of transparency.
I would like to have this data perfectly, which is not the case. It's always estimates.
Quebec's lockdown begins Thursday. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
We have a clearer picture tonight about the financial fallout from COVID-19 and a warning the pandemic could have a permanent impact on the Canadian economy. The Parliamentary Budget Office says the federal deficit for 2020 is on track to be more than $328 billion. Relative to the size of the economy, the deficit amounts to 15% of the gross domestic product. That's by far the largest the country has seen in over 50 years. Much of the spending is on emergency aid to support businesses and individuals and is expected to be temporary. The PBO projects the budget deficit will fall to about $74 billion next year. Canada and the UK are imposing sanctions on the man who claims to be president of Belarus and 10 other government officials there. The measures include freezing assets and barring them from entering Canada. Widespread protests and violent government arrests have gripped the country since the presidential election 52 days ago, which Canada calls illegitimate. Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne says Belarus is committing systematic human rights violations and shows no indication of being genuinely committed to finding a negotiated solution with opposition groups. The opposition leader of Belarus, who is in exile in Lithuania, met with the French president, Emmanuel Macron, today. Macron is promising to work on securing the release of political prisoners in Belarus. President Trump and Democratic nominee Joe Biden will face each other tonight on stage in Cleveland, Ohio, and in front of millions of Americans watching on TV. It is the first U.S. presidential debate of 2020. 90 minutes with no commercials. Trump, who is 74, and Biden, who is 77, will be scrutinized as much for how they perform as the substance of what they say. Jackson Prosco, our Washington bureau chief, is with me. Jackson, given what we know about these two men, what strategies can we expect?
Hi, Donna. Well, there's good reason to expect that Donald Trump will go on the attack against Joe Biden pretty much from the outset tonight. Remember, he already got himself impeached over going after Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden. That doesn't mean the topic is off limits tonight. In fact, we expect to hear that a fair bit this evening. There's also a sense that Trump will broadly attack Biden's record in Washington, his many, many years in public service in this country, and really try and paint him as sort of a gateway to extremism on the left. Joe Biden faces a double-barreled challenge here. On one hand, he's expected to go after Trump for what he has consistently called a failure of leadership over issues like the pandemic, which has killed 200,000 Americans. On the other hand, he has to avoid getting dragged into the fray and really has to try and paint himself as a capable, competent statesman, a safe choice, especially for Republicans who might not be comfortable voting for Trump.
Jackson, these presidential debates are rarely game changers for voters. What do the polls indicate about how many undecided voters there are and how many might be swayed by what they hear tonight?
Yeah, keep in mind there are 6 topics for tonight's debate, and they're things like the pandemic and the economy and race relations in this country. And voters certainly care about those issues, but they care far more about the issue of whether or not Donald Trump is president. And an astonishing 90% of voters, according to polls, have already made up their mind about who they're voting for. There's not a lot of room to pick up new supporters tonight, although arguably both men will be trying to do that. Really, the polls have been consistent in Biden's favor. He's maintained a 6 to 8 point lead for 3 or 4 months now. Those numbers haven't budged, Donna. Voters are really locked in at this point.
I'm always skeptical of the polls, though, especially after the last time. And Jackson, this campaign and this whole year has been flooded with misinformation, conspiracy theories, lies, and stuff is spreading about this debate before it's even started. Tell us about that.
Yeah, these are rumors that tend to come up around every debate, but they're specific to this one in the sense that Donald Trump has put a lot of effort into claiming that Joe Biden is in some sort of mental decline. That, of course, is a baseless conspiracy theory, but now it seems like the Trump campaign is worried that Biden might actually perform well this evening. So they're spreading the rumor that perhaps he's taking performance-enhancing drugs or wearing some sort of earpiece to feed him the answers. Donna, that is all baseless, but it gives you a sense of the information war that's going to surround an event that has a Super Bowl-sized audience.
All right, we will be watching. Jackson Prosco in Washington, thanks. Another province is having a pandemic election. Coming up, what's at stake in Saskatchewan? Voters in Saskatchewan are heading to the polls on October 26th. It's the 3rd province to hold an election in the midst of the pandemic. Premier Scott Moe took over the leadership of the Saskatchewan Party from Brad Wall in 2018, so this will be his first crack at getting elected as Premier. Ryan Kessler is with me from Saskatoon. Ryan, what kind of campaign is expected?
Donna, the governing Saskatchewan Party is asking voters who they trust to lead the economic recovery coming out of the COVID-19 pandemic. As you mentioned, it's Scott Moe's first race as leader, but he's relying on his party's track record over the course of the last 13 years while attacking the opposition NDP. According to Moe, the Sask Party has the right plan to make life more affordable in Saskatchewan while balancing the budget by 2024. He says the province's NDP and leader Ryan Miley would go on a spending spree if elected.
He wants to spend with no plan to balance, no plan to grow the economy here in the province, which ultimately means that there will be cuts at some time in the future when this type of reckless spending is allowed to occur.
Of the legislature's 61 seats, 46 are held by the Sask Party, 13 belong to the New Democrats, and 2 are vacant. The NDP is positioning itself as the party that will invest in the people files, such as education and healthcare. The NDP's tone is similar to what it was during the 2016 election, accusing the Sask Party of planning cuts instead of investments.
And if they're re-elected, it will only be worse. Austerity on steroids.
On day one of this campaign, both parties were light on platform specifics, but heavy on political rhetoric. There's still plenty of time for those details before voters head to the polls with pandemic precautions on October 26th. Donna?
All right, Ryan Kessler in Saskatoon tonight. Thanks. Virus detector next, the Canadian technology putting hope in the air. A company in southwestern Ontario claims to have developed game-changing technology in the fight against COVID-19. It's designed a wall-mounted device that looks similar to a carbon monoxide detector. It scans the air for COVID-19 particles. The devices aren't in use yet. They're still in the testing phase, and they're not cheap. The cost is about $12,000 each. Jeff Semple explains how they work and how they could one day be put to use.
The pandemic is a fight against an invisible enemy. But what if there was a way to detect COVID-19 lurking inside a classroom or on a train? An Ontario company claims they've developed a tool to do just that.
We feel very good about, being part of the solution.
Paul Gezzi's company specializes in indoor air quality. Their tech typically used to check for dangerous gases in industrial facilities. But when COVID-19 struck, Gezzi wondered if their tools could be repurposed for the pandemic.
Could we look for COVID like we do for air quality?
They developed this wall-mounted device called BioCloud. Placed in a classroom, for example, or any space up to 1,000 square feet, Gezzi says a built-in fan sucks up all the air in the room multiple times in an hour, which is then instantly analyzed.
we believe our technology will flag and alert for COVID, and then you can properly test each individual.
Lab tests at this Ontario university found the BioCloud device could quickly and effectively detect an array of airborne pathogens, including the virus that causes COVID-19.
There's absolutely huge potential for this type of technology.
Similar tech is being developed around the world to detect COVID-19 in the air or in a patient's breath. While experts debate to what extent the virus is airborne, studies show it can linger in a poorly ventilated room for hours.
But if they're in the classroom for like 3 to 6 hours at a time, with no ventilation, eventually wherever you disperse it, that virus will build up and build up and build up.
But pulling a virus out of thin air is tricky. COVID-19 is fragile and looks similar to other virus particles.
I was quite happy to see actually this new technology coming up. But as a scientist, then the questions start coming up, what is the level of sensitivity? How selective is the device against just this particular virus, the novel coronavirus?
And at this point, we don't know. BioCloud's technology is a trade secret, but it's now being reviewed by the Canadian government, and the company hopes to start selling to customers around the world by November. Jeff Semple, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is Fraser's Grove Park in Winnipeg. Thanks for watching. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.